Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Apparently, my opening music and opening title was missing. Anyway, this would be Robservations, the show about something, Robservations, episode number 376. And I, of course, am your viceroy of verisimilitude, your master of fun and wonder, your existential Mr. Rogers, your chancellor of cheerfulness, your archbishop of Banterbury, your whatever you want to call me. There's so many names. People are hanging on me. I can't even keep up. I am, of course, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Robcasting from the Robservatory to you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. It's great to be here. It's great to be talking to you once again. Almost done with Ozark Season 3. And I'm loving it. The Bird family, man, they just can't catch a break. They just keep digging that hole deeper and deeper and deeper. This season, I quite enjoyed seeing Marty and Wendy pitted against one another. It's been very interesting. It's kind of what I wanted from Godfather 3. I wanted to see Michael Corleone and Tom Hagen going, against one another, but they couldn't. They didn't want to meet Robert Duvall's quote, which was sort of unfortunate. But anyway, I've got a pretty interesting show for you today. I thought it was going to be bleak. I thought these times with no new entertainment news to pontificate on or whatever. But I've decided to look back, to go backwards and see where we came from, ladies and gentlemen, to see where we've been. I also found a really interesting comment that was left on yesterday's show by one of our very own imagination connoisseurs that I think is even in the chat today. We're going to talk about what he had to say. So it's going to be an interesting show, but I bet you're asking yourself this question. And that question is, what movie are we going to watch tomorrow? What movie, whining about movies tomorrow night, what's it going to be about? I mean, we've been dealing with sort of dysfunctional relationships. And tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, I've got a doozy. We're going to reach into our cinematic legacy and show or discuss one of the greatest, well, the Richard will put it on as a watch party, hopefully, on the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page. But this film, when people talk film noir, ladies and gentlemen, this is right at the top of the list. This is not obscure. This is not a cult title. I guess it's a cult title now because it's over 70 years old. But it's one of the great, I would say it's one of the great movies ever made. It stars Barbara Stanwyck, Fred MacMurray, and the great Edward G. Robinson. And I, of course, am talking about Double Indemnity, ladies and gentlemen. If you have not seen Double Indemnity, first of all, why? Why haven't you? And second of all, this is a great opportunity to watch one of the great movies of in all of cinematic history. Certainly a defining moment in the film noir genre. Maybe the defining moment. And we are going to watch it, ladies and gentlemen. Elizabeth will watch it for the first time. We're going to check it out tonight. And we offer you the chance to come whine about it with us tomorrow at 8 p.m., ladies and gentlemen. Whining About Movies, Episode 8, Double Indemnity. Ooh, yeah. So I bet you're all wondering about the title of this chat. Or maybe not. Maybe you're not wondering. Maybe nobody even cares about the titles of these chats. I don't know. But I was digging into the history. I don't know why. I was looking into fandom, and I found a site that I really wasn't very familiar with, a site called Porn Kitsch. And there was a very fascinating article or letter that was written by Henry Hassa in 1939, ladies and gentlemen. 1939, called I'm Through with Science Fiction, written in 1939. So I figured, why not delve into it? I mean, if this is something we can't, I want to go through this article, then the article, the comment that was actually left by one of our own. So I figured, with all the conversation going on, here is the article. The editor of this magazine, Ray Bradbury, under the impression that I am still one of that queer tribe known as science fiction fans, has asked me to write an article. I am no longer a science fiction fan. I'm through. However, I've decided to do the article and explain with my chin leading just why I am through. So here goes. As to science fiction, the trouble with me, I think, is that I've outgrown the stuff mentally. And that's not a boast. seeing the type of minds modern science fiction is dished up for. I'll admit there are a few exceptions, but on the whole, sci-fi fans are as arrogant, self-satisfied, conspicuously blind, and critically moronic a group as the good Lord has allowed to people the earth. I don't blush that I was once a sci-fi fan starting back in 1926. I merely thank my personal gods that somewhere along the route I woke up and began to see sci-fi as it really is. The superiority complex found in a group known as science fiction fans is probably unequaled anywhere. Their certitude in their superiority as readers of sci-fi over all other fiction is representative of an absolutely incredibly stupid complacence. Facing the business squarely, we can see why sci-fi lays claim to such superiority for no other obvious reason than that such science fiction is the bastard child of science and the romantic temperament. But not, good Lord, because it is instructive. This has too long been preached until sci-fi readers actually believe it. The amazing naivete of these readers who think their literature is superior merely because they think it teaches. This simply moves me to despair. The fact is, any literature whose function it is to teach ceases to be literature as such. It becomes didactic literature, which is the color of another horse. When literature becomes obsessed by ideas as such, it is no longer literature. Just how the delusion could have arisen that writing, because invested with scientific symbols, automatically became possessed of new and more precious values is beyond me to explain. Ideas are out of place in literature unless they are subordinate to the spirit of the story. But sci-fi readers have never perceived this. Give us science, they shriek, running with clenched fists uprisen to the stars. We want science. Give us the great God. Well, they are given science, and what does it turn out to be? For the most part, the scourings of the lunatic fringe. Talk about scientists being inspired by sci-fi stories. Phew! Why not one sci-fi writer in 50 has the remotest idea of what he's talking about? He just picks up some elementary idea and kicks the hell out of it. I'll wager that no scientist is going to produce very spectacularly on the basis of any ideas provided by science fiction. It is possible, but wholly improbable. Science don't tick that way. Another amusing fallacy, this well-known business of Wells and Verne doing some predicting. It's one of the biggest laughs of all. They made a flock of predictions, a few of which were realized, and some only in ways most vaguely related to the original conception. How many ideas did they have that never have been realized and never will? Give them credit for being good and often logical guessers, perhaps, but don't claim that as a merit for their writing. And how many other good guessers must have been who never got around to setting down their predictions in print? There is but one affectation about Wells's scientific stories, which he published before he discovered his capability at characterization, and this is the affectation of imagination. There is no genuine imagination in beating out cleverness of the sci-fi type. The point of view, the inventive quality necessary for their construction is the same as with widely circulated tales of Nick Carter. Science fiction stories are not struck forth with a creative hand. They are manufactured products and put together piecemeal, none of them being written in any but the calmest and most conscious mood. They are lacking in that important element of all really great works of imagination, inspiration. And what is inspiration? It is essentially the soaring of one's soul without the knowledge of mind. In the gleaming moment, the mind becomes the slave of the spirit. Read Wells's Experiment and Autobiography and see why and what he thinks of his early writings on sci-fi. He admits that they were only a means to an end, a preparation for his more serious writing that was to come later. Plato's Republic and More's Utopia also serving largely to hasten Wells' utopian proclivities. When he really began to take his predictions seriously, he began to turn out the important stuff which now bores the average sci-fi enthusiast silly. Or should I say, sillier. As for Verne, his stuff has never been literature except for boys. It is innocuous adventure, stuff that will not pervert morals. It is not too badly written, and the language is so simple that Verne is readily to be read in the original French. In fact, some of his stuff serves as textbooks in French classes in American schools. But in the main, what I'm speaking about now is science fiction as it is constituted today. All of this modern science fiction is worthless, except in perhaps one minor respect, and I'm not even sure of that. It can open the minds of girls and boys reaching puberty, giving them a more Catholic attitude towards startling new ideas. However, it is so very often fatal at the same time, in that these boys and girls become obsessed with it. It enmeshes them until, as I said, they become incredibly blind to all else. So certain are they of the superiority of their hobby over all other fiction. There are exceptions, but my experience has proven that the exceptions are, by far, a minority. I also will admit that science fiction can, on occasion, provide escapist flights of imagination. In fact, it can be admirable for this, but this type of science fiction has become exceedingly rare because this crazy superstructure of science, and even more so adventure, has become such a fetish that sound writing concerning people is rarely to be found, and in pulp science fiction, never. And the frightful smugness fostered by the modern sci-fi magazines is simply appalling. It seems that not only the readers, but the editors and writers as well, cannot or will not see anything beyond their own perverted models. Just as one example, which I remember very well, look how Brave New World, the admirable and really important novel by Huxley, was received a few years ago. It was Clark Ashton Smith, I believe, who mentioned it as embodying some of Huxley's habitual pornography. Simply stunning. P. Schuyler Miller, whom I might mention I consider to be one of the most intellectual authors and fans. And reviewing the book, C.A. Brandt also decried its preoccupation with sex, but said complacently that it might at least bring to the attention of people that there was such a thing as science fictionists and their so-called literature. Of all the damned nonsense, Brave New World was, as a matter of fact, a satire on sex, and of far more importance than to bring to the attention of people that there is such a thing as sci-fiction. Huxley conceived a future world in which Ford's mechanistic contributions had become so emphatic as to deprive the people of all but an animal interest in sex. He projects a more normal man into such a civilization for no other reason than to characterize present-day tendencies with searing satire. But Brandt, he evidently would demolish this to set up in its stead a space-wrecked on Mars atrocity. To get back to the subject, it is my honest opinion that no person of very conspicuous intelligence can subsist very considerably on sci-fi after he begins to mature intellectually. There is simply not enough of it to provide intellectual or spiritual nourishment. He may string along with it a few years out of habit or some mental quirk, but stuff aimed at juvenile minds cannot very long sustain a person of mature years unless that person is himself a mental adolescent. The way the fans flocked to the Sci-Fi League indulge in tests to prove their superiority over other readers, the silly letters in the mags, the petty internal strife, and many other things have served to widen the gulf between me and science fiction. The most important thing, however, is that I've discovered that there's been too much else of importance, real importance, that has been said and written in this world, and is being and will be, for me to desire to give much attention to such a petty thing as science fiction anymore. I shall read on the fringe of it, but increasingly less frequently, I'm afraid. I might have summed up this entire thing by saying, I'm satiated, but that wouldn't be the entire truth. The entire truth would be, I am satiated and much wiser. In conclusion, let me point out that this is only one man's opinion. I have intentionally been harsh in my estimates. Maybe some points are in need of qualification or elucidation, but by and large, I stand back of what I have written here. Amen. First published in Futuria Fantasia, Volume 1, Number 2, Fall 1939, by Henry Hassa under the pen name Fu-Ionia. Worth noting that Hassa, under his own name, wrote a rebuttal to Anya in the next issue. Henry Hassa wrote or co-wrote numerous short stories. that was, of course, I found this article. I don't know. I really don't know this website. But yes, indeed, I found it on Porno Kitsch. And I was delighted by this article, finding it written in 1939. And gosh, I think it's probably just as relevant today as it was back in 1939. But it's good to know that even back in the 30s, the late 30s, I guess, let's see, when was this published? So again, it was published. Let's see what it was published in fall 1939. So before we had entered World War II. But what a fascinating article. What an interesting look back into our past. Fandom was divided. I mean, here it sounds like this guy actually is a science fiction fan, but now he's like, he feels bad about being a science fiction fan. I did not read his rebuttal. I would like to find his rebuttal that was written under his own name rather than a pen name, because I suspect he probably comes out in favor of science fiction. I will find that, and I will share that with you. So I thought that was pretty neat, and it made me just think about, you could put Star Trek instead of science fiction. You could put Star Wars in there. You could put Doctor Who in there instead of the blanket science fiction. And I felt that it would work. It really appealed to fans everywhere. And I thought that, wow, what a delightful piece to share with the Post-Geek Singularity community, because if nothing else, it will foster some kind of conversation. And to follow it up, I do read all the comments that are left on these shows. I do read them. And for the most part, they're pretty constructive. I'm actually very impressed by a lot of the conversation that people are having on the comments. Well, I like the back and forth. Sometimes, I get personally attacked, and that's fine. I can be personally attacked when you put yourself out in a public forum. You're going to get personally attacked. It goes with the territory. But I'm actually surprised at how little I am personally attacked. That's not saying that I'm inviting everybody to take me apart online. I don't necessarily need that. But for the most part, I think the constructive comments on these chats are great. And I read something from yesterday's show from our own B.L. Alley. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, our own B.L. Alley. He's jumped back and forth being an imagination connoisseur, and he's an author in his own right. He was sharing things he's written with the Post-Geek Singularity just the other day, and he wrote a comment, and I figured I would share this comment with you as well, because I think it's relevant to the conversation. So here it is. Writer B.L. Alley wrote, "Entertainment is suffering from the same problem as society as a whole. For whatever reason, we've become extremists, black or white, left or right, Marvel or DC, God or science. These conflicts are silly because reality and truth always lies somewhere between the extremes, never at those extremes. How we view our entertainment should be no different, because arguing that one format is better than another is nonsense. Print and digital each offer both advantages and disadvantages. Print provides a feeling of ownership and sensory satisfaction digital simply cannot match. But digital presents the same material without the use of finite resources, while also allowing far more content to be purchased and stored in less space, and usually for less money. This is why I offer my books in both formats. There is no feeling that can compare to holding something I created in my hands, but I also appreciate the fact that many readers can enjoy my work on different devices. It's also nice to be able to touch a word and learn the definition or etymology of a word, or the historical significance of a phrase or character. We should be embracing and celebrating the fact that we are afforded such choices, rather than fighting over which is better. Another problem I see all too often these days are modern creators attempting to be edgy or profound. Compounding the issue is the fact that most of them possess neither the academic nor vocational experience upon which to draw in order to make such lofty literary aspirations meaningful, or in many cases even palatable. There's nothing wrong with telling a simple story well. That doesn't mean dumbing down the story, characters, and technical details. It means sticking to the elements which contribute directly to that story, rather than drifting off into some half-baked exploration of the author's feelings about politics, socioeconomic crises, or how his air conditioner can make cold air out of hot. Such topics and 1,000 others are certainly important, but sometimes we just need a good story about competent people solving problems so their lives might continue. The irony, of course, is the harder they try to create something intelligent or profound, the more they reveal their limitations. That is why modern Star Trek and so many other books, shows, and movies become incoherent dumpster fires. They need to stop being edgy and instead give us good characters doing their best to meet challenges in a realistic manner, and offer it in as many formats as possible. They also need to take the time to understand their source material rather than perform superficial scans of it. Very succinct, very to the point, and something I agree with. So kudos to BL for writing that. And that's the kind of commentary that I usually get on these chats. I mean, not all of it is as I thought as worth sharing as BL's is, but for the most part, in terms of if you wanted to call my comments, if they existed within a certain genre, the genre of quality would be the comments that I usually get on these chats, which make these chats, for me at least, worth doing. So I want to thank BL for saying that or writing that, taking the time to do it, because it just elevates the discourse even further, and I appreciate it. So it was interesting for me to sort of read that article, all the way back from 1939, because so often we write off. We think that science fiction. I mean, I've always said, I've said on the show, that I believe that the point of demarcation between old school fans and newer fans began with Star Wars. Star Wars began a media revolution. Sure, in terms of movies and television, there were science fiction and fantasy shows and fantasy films on television and in the movies that were considered, obviously incredible milestones of the genre, all the way back to whether you want to go back to From the Earth to the Moon, you want to go to The Lost World, or you want to go to Metropolis from the silent era, then moving into things like King Kong. And then, of course, by the 50s, we get George Powell's movies like War of the Worlds, When Worlds Collide, Conquest of Space. Then we're dealing with Forbidden Planet, which was a reimagining of Shakespeare's The Tempest, and all the way through the 60s with Planet of the Apes, and my favorite, Wild Wild Planet, and 2001. Now, Wild Wild Planet is not a shining example. It's just one that I particularly love. It, to me, is the Star Crash of its era, maybe even a little better. But Star Wars was really the game changer. And then following 6 months later was Close Encounters. And between the two of those films, the modern genre fan, I think, was born. For me, it started earlier with Star Trek and The Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and the movies I was watching from the 40s, 50s, 60s as a kid. And really, I think the thing that turned me on the most, even before Star Wars, but definitely sent me down. Star Wars was everything else was cranking up, and then Star Wars was when my roller coaster plunged down the big hill. But Logan's Run was definitely a part of that when I saw that in the theater. And so Star Wars is what really sort of started to change everything and turned science fiction on a mass scale into a money-making proposition, at least at that level. But it's been interesting, if you were a reader of science fiction all the way back to 1939, obviously we weren't hearing Mr. Hesse talk about movies because nobody cared and television didn't exist. So science fiction was, in its purest form, its purest state, a literary genre. So it was nice to know that there was fan bickering and squabbling even in the magazines, science fiction magazines of the day. It's nice to know kind of that we haven't changed. Fandom hasn't changed, which is good. But what I think that both BL and what Hesse was kind of getting at is Hesse didn't believe that science fiction could ever reach the heights I think it has reached now, both in between the pages of a great book or on the big screen. I think if Hesse had seen movies like Arrival, or 2001, or Blade Runner, or Planet of the Apes, I think he might have had a different take, especially with, of course, science fiction began as flights of fancy, and it's interesting, this essay being written right after Brave New World came out, And I'm sure that put the zap on a lot of people's minds when it was dealing with sort of heady concepts. And it was very political in nature, and yet it used science fiction as a jumping off point, which is pretty interesting. So, yeah, it's always just interesting to go back, because we always think that we're so enlightened, but so much enlightenment was going on back in the day. We just like to believe that, oh well, we live in the most enlightened times, and those old fuddy-duddies back in the day, what did they know? Well, they knew the same things that we know now. Maybe our science is certainly advanced, but ideas, I don't think ideas have evolved really that much. And it's always nice to go back and explore those things. And that's kind of why I wanted to read. I was just looking for a subject. I was like, do I do another open mic? Or I was looking into science fiction fandom and science fiction fandom in the past. I don't even know. I was just, Googling things and just seeing what popped up. And this article popped up, and I was like, my God, 1939. I got to read this. How cool is that? So, yes, indeed. I shared it with you. I don't know what you guys will think of it, but it's very interesting. Reading the commentary on Star Trek, especially Picard, has been all over the place. Obviously, there's been a lot of media outlets that have published articles about how it was really a disappointment. And there's been others that really like it. And it really, in my mind, speaks to the way that we are consuming and what we're trying to get out of it. Everybody comes at these things from a different perspective. If you want to sit down, a friend of mine who always told me, she says, Star Trek is my comfort food, whether it's good or bad. I just like watching it. And like, okay, I understand that. To me, I look at it with more of a critical eye. And I think my... the way I look upon Star Trek has obviously been shaped by my love of the original series growing up, and it had to, because you can't really understand, I think, Star Trek without having a holistic and pretty great working knowledge of the original series, because that is Star Trek. I mean, your favorite shows might not be the original series. You might look back and be like, it's from the 60s. So cheesy, and the colors and the monsters and the special effects and the papier-mâché rocks, even though I reject that. But it is Star Trek. Whatever you want to say, that's what it was. Everything else is following up, and it comes out of that conceptually. And as we move further and further away, and what people don't understand, the superficialities of Star Trek are fine, but those are never the things I like. The superficiality is the flavor, and I think a lot of science fiction, whether it's spaceships or the characters or whatever, all of that is the surface of it all. But when you get down into it, what Hesse was talking about being literature, the characters and the stories are what are really important. And they're specifically even more important when it comes to science fiction, because in science fiction, you can lose yourself in all of that superficiality. And what's really important is to have those compelling characters, to really dig into the human truths, which is what any great story does. And the way there are people that they just want simple entertainment, and they haven't read every Star Trek manual, tech manual, the Star Trek medical reference book, or Star Trek maps, the star charts. Like, do they have to read those things? I don't think so. Those were created secondarily by people that enjoy the show, but I don't expect everybody with just a cursory desire to sit down and be entertained for an hour to be those kind of fans. They don't have to be. I mean, it's neat that they are. I'm one of those fans, but I bring all of that extraordinary baggage with me when I watch Star Trek. I mean, I've said I don't think Picard did a very good job of telling the story it wanted to tell. And if there's any failing, that's its failing, is that it didn't tell. And a lot of people think, come on, Rob, I was totally entertained by it. Well, again, you get out what you put into it. And if somebody's just wants to be entertained, they might very well be. I know lots of people that were entertained by Picard, and all kinds of, whether it's Doctor Who, whether it's the new James Bond movie, all of these franchises that have existed for such a long period of time. I think that even creators get to the point where they're like, well, this has been around for 50 years, so we don't really have to put as much thought into it. And I think that's a mistake. I think more thought needs to be put into it now more than ever. The older something is, the more you have to be really creative and good at what you're doing in order to make great Trek, great Doctor Who, great James Bond, great Star Wars. All of these things really require, rather than be easier, they should be getting harder and harder and harder to make. But anyway, that's just a thought. What do you guys think? I don't know. People are firing in chats. Let's see what they are saying. Willow sends a tip and says, if you watch The Sound of Music, I will try and get my mom to get back to watching Gladiator. Wow, everybody really wants me to watch The Sound of Music. Well, maybe I will after, of course, we watch Double Indemnity, which if you haven't seen it, you really should. Yeah, it's black and white. So, watch it. Mattuine sends in a super chat and says, it is the 81st birthday of my favorite spaghetti western actor, Terrence Hill. I think I'll celebrate by watching him in Superfuzz. HBO ran it over and over again when I was a kid. Did you ever see it? I've never seen Superfuzz. Or maybe I have, but I don't remember it. That doesn't mean it's not good. That doesn't mean I haven't. I should look into that. That's a movie I will look into. Alexander Wilson sends in a super chat and says, as a millennial that grew up in the urban city of D.C., the murder capital in the 90s, we watched a lot of gangster movies like Casino and Menace to Society. What is your favorite gangster movie? Well, I mean, I have to say The Godfather, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, and Godfather 2. But, I mean, I love gangster movies. I love Casino. I love Menace to Society. New Jack City, King of New York in terms of modern gangster movies. Heat, of course, the modern gangster film, Scarface, all of these, Carlito's Way. You know, modern gangster films are great too, but then you go back and you watch movies like White Heat. I mean, those movies are pretty dope as well. And there's something about gangster films that I find irresistible. Maybe it's because gangsters have a code. Maybe that's it. I really do love gangster movies, and it's not surprising that growing up in Washington, D.C., you know, it was interesting watching gangster movies change. And gangster movies sort of became gang movies, like Menace to Society is more of a or Set It Off or something, you know, because we had with the modern gang warfare. Like, it was interesting. If you watch The Warriors, which came out in 1979, in The Warriors, a gang using a gun was like sacrilegious. When Cyrus gets assassinated by the Rogues at the beginning, David Patrick Kelly, guns are like this pussy thing. You know, the real people wouldn't use, the Gramercy Riffs don't use guns. The Warriors don't use guns. The Lizzies used guns and the Rogues used guns, but using a gun as a gang member, and this is 1979, then jump forward to New Jack City. And guns are fetishized, you know, everybody. Nino Brown, one of my favorite modern gangsters. I mean, Wesley Snipes. I love New Jack City. You can't not I don't think you can't not. It's not a perfect movie, but I wanted to be a New Jack hustler after that. And to me, you know, these smart gangsters come in and turn a tenement into a whole drug empire. I love that. But the idea that guns suddenly became, and I understand from a utilitarian standpoint, if you're going to go to war with a gang, you know, you need guns. It's not like gangsters didn't always use guns, but, you know, yeah. So those are some of my favorites, I think. And I love gangster movies. The first hour of Casino is one of the greatest things I think ever made. I love it. And I love Menace to Society. Menace to Society is pretty hardcore. Really good movie. Martian Manhunter sent in a super chat and says, loved your Rise of Skywalker coverage, and it led me to wonder, any chance you would do a deep dive on the Singer X3 that could have been? I know you got the deets. Well, you know, a lot of what Brian's idea for X-Men 3 was wound up in First Class. It really had to do with the Hellfire Club and the conflict between the Hellfire Club and the X-Men. I think it was much more, I mean, it was much bigger, but that's kind of what he wanted to do. I could do a deep dive on that. I mean, hell, I could probably just get Brian to come on the channel and talk about it if he would do it. I don't know if he would, but he might. I mean, that's what you'd want to do, is hear it from the horse's mouth, I suppose. Mukbang Reviews sends in a super chat and says, today's Prince song is Girls and Boys. He only knew her for a little while. He had grown accustomed to her smile. I love Girls and Boys. That is off of Parade, which was released to support, or I guess maybe Under the Cherry Moon was released to support Parade, but Parade was the soundtrack of Under the Cherry Moon. What a great album. Girls and Boys is great. Somebody was posting Joy and Repetition. Joy and Repetition off Graffiti Bridge is one of my favorite Prince songs, Mukbang. And I never got to see it performed live. There is some French in there, and I don't know the French. I'm not gonna. Every time on whining about movies, Claude Hibbert always sends in French and makes me read it, and I can't do it. I can't read French. I'm sure it's people are going. See, bonjour mon ami. Is Elizabeth enjoying listening to you? Partes français. My comment, Kurtzman, Chabon, and others are doing a horrible job of championing liberal causes by their ham-fisted attempts to integrate diversity into established universes. Oh, no doubt. I mean, and like what B.L. Alley was saying in his comment, and the Burnett axiom is you can't force your agenda, never put your agenda before your characters and your story. And what's so strange to me is so many stories that I grew up reading I thought were progressive and spoke to secular humanist values and things like that. And, science fiction has always sort of, in terms of like gender politics and things like that, Ursula Le Guin, her The Left Hand of Darkness. Science fiction has always kind of looked into these things, and it was very interesting, and when you make it so, like you said, ham-fisted, it's lame. I mean, it's really, really, really lame, and it puts people off. And I don't understand why. If it's done well, it doesn't put people off. That's the thing. If it's done well, but because it becomes like reading about Marvel Comics having characters named Snowflake and Safe Space, like I can't imagine beating your head over an audience more with your agenda than that, which is kind of silly. Claudius goes on to say, of course, I support diversity, but Kurtzman and Chabon make me think they're actually working against progressive causes. The Expanse and the original Star Trek address diversity better. Well, the only way to really address diversity, I think, is to just show it. If you want to show characters and you want to support diversity, you just have characters that are matter-of-factly the way they are. I mean, what I love about The Expanse is it has a pretty racially diverse group of characters, a lot of people that are of mixed race descent, and they're not hammering home that. It's just that's the way the future would be. As mankind travels more, as humanity moves off the Earth and moves to Mars or moves to the Belt or wherever, beyond the ring, wherever they're going to go, people are going to, the petty differences we've had for the human history will go away because there'll be a lot less people in space because it's harder to live out there. So, and also as people can travel around the world, they'll start meeting people that are different than they are. And that goes away pretty quickly. I mean, I've discovered that traveling around the world, any problems, and there's prejudices everywhere. Every society hates some other society or some other group of people. But as soon as you take yourself out of your comfort zone and move into a place and you start meeting people that look very different from you, it quickly falls by the wayside after about the first meal. When you sit down and have a meal with somebody, you break bread with somebody, well, then you realize people are pretty much alike all over. And that's when, you start falling in love or being interested in people that don't necessarily look like you because you've never experienced that before. And, I'm a big fan of getting passports and traveling and meeting people and all that. Journey's End sent in a $5 super chat and said, do you think Brian Fuller would come on the show and do a Q&A? Possibly answer some new Trek questions? He might. I mean, here's the thing, though. Brian Fuller is still credited as the co-creator of Discovery, and he's always going to make money from that show forever, however long it lasts. I don't know how much money, but he's always going to make money, and he has to protect his position. So ultimately, his name still is on Star Trek Discovery, so it's not like he could really come on and talk shit about the show. And by the way, I wouldn't let him do that either. Like I'll talk shit about the show, but I would never, if somebody that was actually a creative on Star Trek came on, even if Michael Chabon called me up, or even if Alex Kurtzman called me up and said, I would like a chance to come on your show and address the concerns you have and many other fans about what we're doing with modern Star Trek, I would have him on and I would be entirely respectful. You know, I would tell him to his face, I think that I don't like what he's doing, but I would do it in a respectful manner. I wouldn't be like, fuck you, Alex Kurtzman. I would definitely have him on, and we would have, actually, I'll bet you I could do the best interviews anyone. I mean, I did it for 3 years with everybody that worked on Enterprise and Star Trek The Next Generation. I mean, Roger Lay did most of the interviews for Enterprise, but I did most of the Next Generation interviews, and I think that I'd be happy to talk to anybody involved with Star Trek, and I think they would enjoy talking to me. I think we would have a great time. I don't think that they could for various reasons, whether it was my past involvement in Axanar or whatever, what I've been saying about the show for 3 years. But I would absolutely, I'd talk to anybody about Star Trek, but I wouldn't want to get someone else in trouble, especially if they have a professional. Like, I'm very mindful of that. When you're talking to somebody on a professional level that has ties to the things that you've made, there is a reality, a business reality, a relationship reality that has to be respected. So, but I would absolutely talk to anyone. Maybe I could ask him. But if I had Brian Fuller on, I would probably say he was on the Inglorious Treksperts podcast, but I would keep the conversation to general Trek philosophy. Like, I wouldn't say, well, seeing as you said that, how can you allow this shitty thing in Discovery to happen? You know, I wouldn't do that. So, look, if there's anybody of note that ever wants to come on this show and do an interview or something, I would have them on in a hot minute. And I would be respectful, and I would not deny what I've said about their work in the past, but I think I'm professional enough and mature enough to be able to have a conversation with anyone about anything. At least I like to think so. Anthony Gonzalez says, one of my favorite gangster films stars Al Pacino, Warren Beatty, and Madonna. Don't laugh. You're talking, of course, about Dick Tracy. And I like Dick Tracy. I think that's a good one. But, you know, obviously Dick Tracy's based on a comic strip, and we all know that New Jack City, Heat, The Godfather, Menace to Society, King of New York, those are real. Get it right. But yeah, I like Dick Tracy. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, when Costner's The Postman was released, there were promotional behind-the-scenes features on TV. I remember a black actor who was so happy about this being his big break. It flopped, and I haven't seen him in anything since then. I feel kind of sorry for him. Let me tell you a story about The Postman. Obviously, it's based on a book that I read. David Brin wrote The Postman. I went and saw that movie at Warner Brothers. I first met Kevin Costner when I was answering phones for my boss, Bill Young, and Kevin Costner came to the office unannounced. I didn't know he was coming in. You know, it was like 7 o'clock at night to meet with Bill, and they were going to a boat show. And that was when I first, it was the only time I've met him face to face, and he had to wait for Bill to finish. So he was just chatting with me. And I think Dances with Wolves had already come out. Nicest guy in the world. Really nice guy. So when The Postman was released, I went to a screening at the Steve Ross Theater on the Warner Brothers lot, and he came out, and this is obviously after Dances with Wolves, he came out and addressed the audience. Packed house. And he said something I'll never forget. He's like, I just wish that I could be with you in the audience and watch this movie for the first time. He was so proud of it and so excited about it. And I saw it in that Steve Ross Theater screening, in that beautiful screening room back when it was new. And I loved The Postman. I loved it. I thought it was so, I just loved everything about it. And to this day, I still love it. And I thought it was unfairly eviscerated. I thought after Dances with Wolves came out and was successful, I think people were gunning for Costner to fail. And I think that movie, I thought it was a great movie. I love The Postman. I stand by it 100%. So that's The Postman story. Mukbang Reviews said, mountains and paradise. I say it's only mountains and the seal love will conquer if you just believe. Oh, yeah. I should sing that. Shouldn't I? Mountains and Parade. So I got to put my glasses on. Where are they? Did I not bring them out here? I might have left them inside. Now I can't see. Now it's hard for me to read, which is kind of a bummer. Oh well. Oh no, here they are. Let me put my glasses on so I can see better, so I can actually read. Man, I got to tell you, there's some dirty. These are some dirty lenses. One day I'm going to get some like Tom Ford frames for my readers instead of these $5 plastic Amazon glasses. But hey, at least I can see. Stub McShave says I'd love to see you interview Walter Mosley. I would love to interview Walter Mosley, but I probably want to talk to him more about Easy Rollins and that kind of stuff. And his science fiction. He's written some. Alexander Wilson sent in a super chat. My grandmom taught Rayful Edmond, the most infamous sociopath drug dealer in history, who turned D.C. into the murder capital. She hates gangster movies because they caused so much pain in real life. That makes sense. I understand. And you watch something like The Wire, which I love, but I think that there's you get certain insight into there's truths in gangster movies, and I think it helps people understand where they're coming from. Evan Newman sends in a tip and says, Rob, wouldn't we all be excited if tomorrow Blumhouse announced a new movie directed by John Carpenter? He does have exposure to Blumhouse via new Halloween movies, but sadly I'm guessing he's out of the writing-directing business for good. Too bad. He's in his 70s now. Hard to believe, but John Carpenter is in his 70s now. And I just think that, he had such a great career. And remember, I think about John Carpenter a lot because in his early career, his student film they were able to flip it, and it was they shot more to it, and Dark Star was turned into a theatrical movie. Then he made Assault on Precinct 13, where he first started experimenting with widescreen and basically a riff on Rio Bravo, and that was pretty good. I mean, I really liked that. And then he goes on to make Halloween, and then The Fog, and then Escape from New York, and he had a really great career going, making money, well regarded from the critical establishment. And then he makes John Carpenter's The Thing, and it is, in his mind, his best work. And I think a lot of people would say it was his best work. And it comes out a couple of days after E.T., and it gets killed. And ever since then, he tried to recapture. I mean, he did a lot of really interesting things. I mean, Starman, you follow up The Thing with Christine, and then Starman, both very respectable movies. Then he does Big Trouble in Little China, which was his biggest budget movie to date, and it flopped. Then he goes back to his indie roots and works with the live films and makes They Live, and with Prince of Darkness and They Live. And then he goes on, whether it's Memoirs of Invisible Man or whether it's Village of the Damned or, In the Mouth of Madness. And I think he's had so many ups and downs, both in the box office and critically, that it's nowadays he's sitting back, lets people remake his movies. I don't know if he'd want to. I mean, if he had a really good idea, him and his wife, Sandy King Carpenter, might do one movie. I would love to see John Carpenter go out make another movie with Blumhouse. And if he had an idea, I mean, can you imagine if Blumhouse put out like something that was as effective as Prince of Darkness, which they made for $3 million back in '87? Man, I'd love to see that. So, Evan, yes, I would be very excited if that happened. Very excited. Anthony Gonzalez sends in a tip and says, if you could get John Ottman on the show to talk music, inspiration, and film scores, it would be glorious. His Days of Future Past score is better than any of the MCU has to offer. Look, I'm also friends with John. I probably could, people have asked me to do interviews with people, and someone like John Ottman is somebody I probably could get on the show. I think it'd be interesting. I should ask him. He might do it. That could be interesting. In the next couple weeks, maybe I should finally, because I always wanted to ultimately turn this in to like the Joe Rogan show for entertainment. Do what I did with special features, and doing the special features for Hills Run Red, where I'm actually delving into these interviews that I did on set with all the cast and our crew. I did all those interviews myself, and looking at them again, I'm like, man, I should really delve into that. And maybe start doing more. I did my Diane Duane interview that I've been working on. I'm going to finally put that out. I did that 1.5 years ago, but I can't wait to release it. Diane Duane being one of my favorite Star Trek novelists who wrote My Enemy, My Ally, and Doctor's Orders. And I would obviously The Wounded Sky, which is one of my favorite Star Trek books, Spock's World, Dark Mirror, a number of Star Trek comics. I got to do more of that. I think that would be pretty great. But you're not wrong. People keep asking me, and I probably should. I think that would be a good idea. I think people would tune in too. I think people would be would dig it, especially depending on who I could get to be on the show. I think that might be pretty interesting. I got letters, man. I've got letters. Let's see what I got. A ton of letters. And let's see. As I find one to read. This one comes from Philip Higginbotham. Philip Higginbotham. Dear Rob, do you think that the serialized format of Picard and Discovery is a reason why many Trek fans from the 90s criticize the new shows? With the 90s shows, TNG, DS9, and Voyager, you used to get between 22 to 24 or 26 weekly Star Trek adventures per season with the odd two-parter here and there. Each episode, unless it was a two-parter, told a new story. And I would genuinely have so much anticipation as to what amazing story would be unfolding that week. It is funny that you mentioned that they will likely rush the final episode to wrap the story up. How can Picard struggle to tell us a story in 10 episodes, whereas the writers on 90s shows could tell you a story in 42 to 43 minutes? With the 90s show, each episode would also focus on a particular genre of storytelling. And each week you would get everything from drama, politics, action, Shakespeare, mystery, loved Sherlock Holmes themed episodes in particular, crime, legal, and so forth. My personal favorite episodes were the Twilight Zone themed episodes, essentially episodes where something strange or spooky would occur. Some examples from TNG include the episodes where Beverly Crusher got stuck in a warp bubble, Remember Me, I love that episode, with people mysteriously vanishing around her, Worf being the only one to shift through parallel universes and parallels, or maybe even the episode where the ship gets stuck in a time loop and Picard shouts, "All hands abandon ship." I repeat, "All hands abandon ship," which is cause and effect. A great one with Kelsey Grammer. I really do miss having a syndicated, non-serialized format. I feel Star Trek would be far better under such a format, and I wish more shows these days had that format. Picard last week felt like I was watching The Synth Uprising, Part 9 of 10. To summarize, I think the problem in general these days, not just with Picard or Star Trek, of taking far too long to tell a story with very little content, a lot of padding and not a lot of substance. How many weeks do we watch Picard and think to ourselves, what actually happened in this episode? I would like to hear your thoughts. Kind regards, an avid watcher, Philip. Well, Philip, we talk about this a lot, and I think that, yes, I agree with you. I love the fact that Star Trek was always basically an anthology show that had the same cast, and you never knew what you were going to get. And they started, as television began to change, and we saw that with things like Hill Street Blues and St. Elsewhere and long-form storytelling, and Star Trek started to adopt that more in terms of like Deep Space Nine, obviously. Voyager even had plot threads. The Icheb storyline was one that it would pick up and carry through multiple episodes. And that's one way of telling a story. But I think as I said, I'm up to episode 8 of this season 3 of Ozark, and I think Ozark does a really good job. Sure, there's a lot of meandering threads, but it keeps the story very tightly wound, and I really like the pacing and how it ratchets up the tension in each season. And has each season been perfect? Certainly not. But Ozark was a show. It's not this prestige show. It doesn't get the kind of it's not Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, but it's really pretty good. And Jason Bateman and the cast is terrific, and this season has been pretty interesting. And what we want is, I think Star Trek can absolutely work in a 10-episode serialized format. It all comes down to the writing. The problem is they've changed showrunners in the middle. They've clearly decided to go a different way halfway through the season than they set up going. And what I really think that the problem with Star Trek Picard is there's too many cooks. There's too many people, even though Michael Chabon wrote most of the latter half of the season, there was too many ideas, and they didn't have one central idea. I mean, the one thing about Ozark is you've got one central idea that they explore the different ramifications of that idea. This husband and wife have got deeper and deeper and deeper into cartel money, and they have to do everything they can to protect their family while satisfying what the cartel wants of them, with the threat of the sort of Damocles being these cartels coming down on their heads and killing them all. I mean, and they look, it's, in a way, it's a very simple setup. It's a simple premise, but they explore it from all of these different angles. And I feel that, the idea of Star Trek Picard, the original idea, the idea of this synth uprising, and that Starfleet did not uphold its ideals, like they could have dealt with this, the corruptibility of Starfleet by showing that once they had Bruce Maddox making these synths, that how quickly their values changed once they had them. Oh, we've got cheap labor. Like, yes, and they could have delved into all of these things. Like, for instance, synths were a great metaphor for automation. So once you have a group of synths, people are out of work. Holograms, people are out of work. And that's a metaphor for what's going on right now. So there's so many interesting avenues that they could have taken when they were making Picard, but you didn't have anybody who knew what the story was. And Michael Chabon tried, but you look at how tightly focused and directed a show like Ozark is. And when I say I want to see a Star Trek season that's as tightly focused as Ozark, and people are like, "Well, Rob, what do you mean? Like, Ozark's not sci-fi?" No. That's the superficiality of all that. Forget the surface stuff. I'm talking about focusing on one idea and exploring that idea from many different facets. And you have from point A to point Z to get to. And what it should have been about is Picard himself exploring all of these different elements of what do synths mean in the Star Trek universe, and then it just meandered all over the place. So there was no overarching theme to the story. So when Picard actually at the end of his life, literally he has to become a synth, this would have been something that would have been resonating, and we would have been building up to it for 10 episodes rather than here's the Golem, or we're at this planet, we're at Coppelius, and here it is, and oh yeah, like we did as soon as this ham-fisted introduction of this synth body. I mean, they never even tied it all. Anyway, I won't go off on it. But the question you asked, Philip, is do I think Star Trek, could it work in a serialized format? Yes, if it's well written. If it's really well written, if it's a great story well told, absolutely. We just haven't had that yet because modern Star Trek has yet to see a great showrunner that really understands and gets Star Trek. And I think that's its fundamental problem. And which is sort of a bummer. This next one comes from our old friend Enterprise H, NCC 1701H, Defender of Deep Space Nine. Greetings. I have a question regarding a story's structural integrity. Is it fair to make a single flaw ruin an entire setting for you or entire story for you? Now, I'm going to be rather harsh, so let me preface this, that I think that very few, if any, people could write a war involving the Federation in the 24th century for the simple fact that it is the living embodiment of Iddick. With that out of the way, let's get on with this. Why weren't the Zakdorn running the war effort on the side of the Federation in alliance? Do you perhaps have a satisfying answer to this question? I really don't. The Expanded Universe's answer just doesn't cut it for me, and the Fires of Armageddon Dominion War reference manual doesn't even feature them, though it's still nice for a bit of fridge horror if you're in the mood. This feels like not featuring the Jedi generals during the Clone Wars in Star Wars. Have I not tried to think of solutions? Of course I have. But then I thought of the Echo Papa 607 and couldn't help but wonder if I had just outsmarted a 5-star admiral at Starfleet HQ and or the greatest strategists of the known galaxy. I don't want to feel smarter than the best at their job, and I cannot help but conclude that this was a case of don't think about it. Well, I mean, again, I think you could write a great story about warfare in the 24th century, but let's all remember, everything in Star Trek, everything is, even though it's an extrapolation into the future, it's really an extrapolation of things that have already happened. I don't think that our future, that human future, the way we're going now, with our technology, let's assume that we survive our infancy and we become a type 1 civilization. Actually, let me get a definition for this, because I don't want to get it wrong. Okay. The Kardashev scale, and let's see what it says here. When will we... Here's an article. I'll read this. This is from February 29th from the Gaia staff. This is from Gaia, the website Gaia. And the question is, when will we advance to a type 1 civilization on the Kardashev scale? What is the Kardashev scale? The Kardashev civilization scale is a hypothetical scale by which civilizations advance technologically, measured by the methods and quantities of energy they are able to harvest. Currently, we fall somewhere between a type 0 and a type 1 civilization on the scale. A type 0 civilization is one that has yet to harness all of the energy outputs of its planet. This type of civilization is still in the process of utilizing unsustainable energy sources like fossil fuels. A type 1 civilization on the Kardashev scale can harness and store all of the energy from its home planet. We haven't quite achieved this level yet, but it is believed we will probably reach it soon. Many consider humans to be somewhere around 0.7 or 0.8 on the scale. And here's Nikolai Kardashev's theory. We like to believe our society is technologically advanced. We've mastered our environment, we're progressing forward exponentially. And while Moore's law is holding up with the rate at which computing power has advanced, we barely rank on the Kardashev scale. And yes, this scale is hypothetical. But it is possible if we are to consider how we might inevitably ascend to the next level. That's why Nikolai Kardashev devised his eponymous scale, ranking civilizations primarily on the ways in which they harness energy. And from there, it goes on to assume a number of other intriguing possibilities. Kardashev is a Russian astrophysicist who developed this thought experiment in 1964. And though we haven't quite reached the first level on his scale, we are a relatively new civilization by his standards. The amount of time required to reach his successive stages often requires millions and sometimes even billions of years. If a civilization can survive long enough to ascend one level without self-destructing, its chances dramatically improve in continuing to further levels. And then it goes on. You know what? You can read this. It's on Gaia.com. I'll just put it in the... But anyway, I think here, I'll put this in the live chat. If we do, in fact, produce or become a type 1... Wait, did it not? Hang on. Hold, please. Here you go. Oh, I can't put the link. It's too big. Well, anyway, it's on the Gaia website. Oh, wait, hang on. Hold, please. Wait a minute. I can do this. Let's see. No, I can't. Thought I could. Well, you'll have to look at it. You'll have to look at the Kardashev scale. And it's interesting. But I think if we progress, our civilization is going to look nothing like Star Trek in the 24th century. We would be way past transhumanism. Our bodies would probably be mostly inorganic. We'd all be cybernetic enhanced beings. That's one of the things I liked about Battle Angel Alita. There was a lot of that. We would all be transhuman. I just don't think that that's assuming our technology progresses. So everything that happens in the Star Trek universe in the 23rd or 24th century, or now beyond with Discovery, is still based in our past. You know, we're still looking at everything in our past. I like Star Trek. It is still ultimately pulp science fiction. But what I find interesting now is that all of the people that are custodians of the franchise are not extrapolating out from the Star Trek universe. It's all a mess. None of their ideas. I mean, that's why there's a synth civilization that is galaxy spanning, and yet look at the Gaia. Look at the Kardashev scale. Has any of the writers of Star Trek wondered, okay, if you are a galaxies spanning synth civilization, you have to then look at the Kardashev scale and ask yourself, okay, if you've been able to harvest the energies of your planet and then moved on to a type 1 or a type 2 civilization, why would you care about organic life? Because you probably ascended from that anyway. I mean, that's my problem with all of it, is there's no extrapolation of anything that even seems remotely realistic, which is a bummer. This next one comes from Hunter Hewitt. Hey Rob, with so many movies being postponed without a new release date, such as A Quiet Place 2, Mulan, Black Widow, In the Heights, Woman in the Window, Spiral, Minions 2, Scoob, and so many others, which movie or movies would you think will be next to do this? That's a good question. A lot of movies have the next big movie I think that I'm really waiting for is Tenet, and that's Christopher Nolan's new film, which I really can't wait to see. And I think movie release, I thought it was like early July 17th. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Tenet moving, but also maybe we won't. Maybe this situation will be alleviated by then. I don't know. Maybe they'll push all movies back, but that would be the next big one, I think, that I can imagine seeing go by the wayside. I think. Our man Bob Koal is here again. To our subcultural concierge. In the spirit of embracing one's own personal mythology, I've come to trust the Post-Geek Singularity well enough to reveal my superpowers. Without any more fanfare, here they are. I have super sight. I could read disclaimers on aspirin bottles without assistance. I have super hearing. I have a lot of drummers as friends. Over the phone, I'd be able to tell what brand of drum cymbal they were playing. Zildjian, pasty, etc. Super strength. I have the combined strength of an average adult male and an 11-year-old. Super youthfulness. I was getting carded well into my 30s, and emotionally I'm still 15 and a half. My greatest power, the power of disarmament. People are unable to get angry with me. Conversely, I am utterly immune to personal insults. I think, hard to tell since no one ever gets mad at me. As is the way of things, there was a price to pay for being bestowed with such powers. I've gone through much of my life with virtually no sense of smell. That, and I'm allergic to molds. I'm getting longer in the tooth, and my powers are beginning to wane. But now I can smell autumn leaves in my autumn years, and pepperoni. As is the tragedy with the superpowered, I did not realize what a heavy price I paid. Maybe this will reveal, and it will inspire other members of the Post-Geek Singularity to come forward to share their own superpowers. Regards, and up, and away. Bob Koal, a.k.a. Attacatch, a.k.a. the Mighty Hatchman. Well, Bob, I think you've just outed yourself. People are going to come after you. The government's going to come after you. I don't know what you're going to do now. That's a tough one. It is a tough one. Let's see. I got a letter from our man Omar94. Omar94 is a very loquacious letter writer. Let's see. Hi, Rob. I'm a millennial who loves classic Hollywood movies. Realizing one thing I notice now is that there are people who've created a division with film versus movie type comments. The idea is that franchises and blockbusters are considered movies, while films are the Oscar or indie art house type ones. This really bothers me, as I think film and movies mean the same thing. There's no difference between the two. It's not like there's a film school and a movie school, or being a filmmaker and a movie maker. To me, film and movies are the same, regardless of budget, scope, and scale. To me, movie is just a casual way of saying film. In classic Hollywood, there was no division, as film and movie meant the same thing. You could have a blockbuster production like Spartacus or Ben-Hur or Lawrence of Arabia, as well as smaller productions like The Apartment, Sabrina, The 7-Year Itch, Some Like It Hot, Maltese Falcon, Big Sleep, etc. And there was no difference between them. They were all considered movies, or films to be more formal. Why do people now place a division based on the budget, scope, and scale? This has been a thing since New Hollywood, as the term blockbuster mentality was created after people like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas came on the scene. Can't people accept both and consider film and movies the same thing? I can like blockbusters like Indiana Jones and Star Wars, but I can also like indie art house stuff too, like Lost in Translation. Thanks, and live long and prosper. Well, I think a lot of the difference has to do with how grounded in actual reality a movie is. You know, anything that's a flight of fancy immediately gets dismissed, you know? And it's funny, like, I always talk about my love of Antonioni and his Ennui trilogy, La Notte, La Ventura, and The Eclipse. You know, you watch those now, most people, as I've said, most people that watch my channel, Imagination Connoisseurs, they were going to go and try and watch Antonioni's Ennui trilogy. They'd be like, what the hell, man? What is this? And I think that it's all about what kind of stories that you like consuming. And I think Flights of Fancy are they do tap into our adolescence and how we felt when we were younger. But that doesn't mean those versions of the story weren't well told. But I think that there is a prejudice, just like the article I read about science fiction. It really depends what kind of story you're telling. I mean, I do think, like, look, the stuff of Tony Stark and his dad in Endgame, those scenes were terrific. And if you put them in Field of Dreams, like, Field of Dreams is about a guy that builds a fucking baseball diamond because he hears voices. And he basically kidnaps J.D. Salinger. Well, it's Terrence Mann. But it was like J.D. Salinger in the original book, I think. I mean, it's a crazy story, but it's seen, I think, more as it's a fantasy, but it's seen more as a realistic movie than, say, Avengers Endgame, even though Endgame has a lot of really great stuff in it. But when you're dealing with I think it's a prejudice across all things. But when you're talking about is it a naturalistic movie about basic human truths? There are people that refuse to see those human truths in movies like Star Wars or Empire or the MCU. They just have a prejudice against that. They're never going to see them as serious. And I think that's kind of a bummer. It is a bummer. This next letter comes from Bethany B. Greetings, Rob. Thank you for your continued awesomeness. It's been a pleasure to watch you and your shows. Oh, thank you very much, Bethany B. I've enjoyed the suggestions of all the movies to watch while stuck at home and thought I would share a few of my favorites that don't seem to come up. The first is Gigi. Wow, there's a pull I wouldn't expect. Gigi from 1958. It's a musical set in the summer of 1900 in Paris. A coming-of-age story with hints of gender roles, social classes, and social change with some of the best dialogue, sets, and costumes. I grew up watching it when I was little. I loved it for the music and dresses. My understanding of all the subtle social commentary within the film as I grew older expanded as I grew older, and now at 32, it is one of the films I rewatch at least once a year. I recently looked it up to learn a little more of its history and to see if I was alone in my love of it. Surprise! It was nominated for and won 9 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. If you've seen it, what are your thoughts? I love Gigi. It is a delightful movie. Is that where Thank Heaven for Little Girls? Is that where that comes from? I don't remember. But Gigi's great, and I would recommend it. I have not seen it in quite some time. I was going on a jag once, I don't know, 30 years ago, watching Best Pictures that I hadn't seen, and I watched that. And it was one of those movies I was dreading watching, and I loved it. I thought it was great. The second film is Darby O'Gill and the Little People from 1959, featuring a super young Sean Connery. It is one of the few films that I can't watch with the lights off. The puka at the beginning and the banshee toward the end are some of the coolest, scariest visual effects. It also has some fabulous forced perspective as there are leprechauns. It's now available, I was going to say, on Disney+. The third one I recently re-watched while waiting for 1917 to come out on disc, and that is Sergeant York, 1941. It's a biopic based on one of America's heroes from World War I. Gary Cooper won the Oscar for Best Actor, and if you watch closely, one of the other soldiers could totally be George McKay's brother. I also wanted to share some cool movie history. Did you know that back in the silent film era, they used to send player piano rolls of music and sound effects with the films? I was watching a tour of a museum, the Siegfried's Mechanics Music Cabinet, in Germany that specializes in self-playing instruments, and they have a 2-story music box that plays both the music and sound effects for the films, wind machines, gongs, etc. It has to be one of the coolest things, especially as it's all mechanical. Here's the length to the video. With the movie music box at the 12-minute and 5-second mark. Damn it, if I can ever, get this in here. If I can ever, I don't know why I'm having such a... Well, there you go. Here it is. I'll put it in here, and if I can't get it into live, I'll get this one in the live chat. So here is that. So there you go. Actually, I haven't put it in yet. Hang on, that was arduous. But yes, so Thank you for reading this and for providing such a welcome space online. Bethany. Well, Bethany, Gigi, Sergeant York, and Darby O'Gill and the Little People. I used to love Darby O'Gill and the Little People myself. I mean, how can you not? It's got Sean Connery in it, which is great. Wow, did you in fact, let me see. People have been firing things in here and I have not read them. Mukbang Review sends in another super chat and says, "Did you read Animal Farm?" I did, but did you ever read The Book of the Dun Cow by Wangerin Jr.? I have not. Same themes, but reminds me of Shadowland by King and Straub. Talk anything. Wait a minute. Shadowland was written only by Peter Straub. That is not a Stephen King collaboration. They did like The Talisman, but they didn't do Shadowlands. Shadowland is a Peter Straub book, and it's one of my favorite books I've ever read, and everybody should read it, Mukbang. That is a great pull. I don't know The Book of the Dun Cow. I need to look that up. Happy Console Gamer is here. Ooh, Happy Console Gamer. I want to thank, first of all, Happy Console Gamer and his wife made a delightful video of the two of them, and what a delightful couple they are, but they were watching Whining About Movies. And I love their video, and I want to thank him. I played it twice. I played it on one of these shows and on Whining About Movies. So Happy Console Gamer writes in and says, "I can't believe no one held Dr. Agnes Girardi accountable for murder. They just were fine with it." You know what? Happy Console Gamer, I am, yes. And if you go to Twitter, Red Letter Media tweeted out a picture of all the characters on the crew of the La Serena. Hilarious. You got to go see it. But you're right. I don't understand. I mean, everybody's a murderer on that crew. They're all brigands and murderers. There's a lot of them. And you're right. How could they not? I mean, and by the way, talk about what a waste of killing Bruce Maddox. And why was he, I mean, you're living at Synth Club Med. Why do you need to borrow money to build what, giant space orchids? Why was Bruce Maddox into the Shylocks? Why was he, and by the way, okay, that's a Shakespearean thing. I know, I don't want anybody, I'm wearing my IDF shirt. Come on. And he was. And I don't understand why do they need to borrow money exactly? How many space orchids were they not able to build? I mean, come on, man. I don't know, Johnny. I don't know. BL Alley sends in a tip and says, "Thank you for the kind words. I valued your opinions on storytelling since your early appearances on Heroes and remain hopeful that we can one day have that chat, even though I lack the hardware to do it on camera or via audio. Cheers." Well, BL, we probably can. I mean, you're here somehow. So we could. Orville Nation is here. I love Orville Nation, by the way. Orville Nation, you should check them out and follow them. They're great. Orville Nation says, "Your clarity of thought and explanations about current Trek are so very much appreciated, Robert." Well, thank you, Orville Nation. There's a lot of people that think I'm insane. I try and be. I just spent a lot of time thinking about Star Trek. And when it comes right down to it, again, you know, Star Trek it's extrapolation of our world today. And when you are not following the logic of our daily life, it gets a little strange. Like, I don't, the story that Star Trek Picard, for instance, was telling, it begins one way and winds up like, you don't even know. We know that the Romulans were planning, I guess the Zat Vash were planning this synth uprising, but why? Why? Like, were they supposed to foment? It seemed like a very clumsy way to. Well, we've banned synths. What? Did anybody investigate? I mean, it seemed a little strange. Why do they think the synths had an uprising? I don't know. Was there a synth Che Guevara? Was there a synth Gandhi? Was there a synth that was preaching synth rights? So that's why they had an uprising? I mean, isn't it obvious that they were hacked or something went awry, something went crazy? And why ban synths? Basically, by banning synths, you're saying we've banned a certain kind of machine, which made no sense to me at all. And they don't know. There was never defined. But yes, Orville, I thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I try and have cogent discourse about these things, even when I apparently can't. Claudia sends in a tip and says, raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens. Mon ami, mon ami. The Post-Geek Singularity community is the most erudite collection of cinephiles on YouTube, but we love some Julie Andrews. To me, Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music has plenty of sex appeal. S'il vous plaît? Play? I can't speak French. S'il vous plaît. I'm sure Elizabeth, if she's watching, is laughing her ass off right now. Also, remember, in Blake Edwards, Julie Andrews' husband, in Blake Edwards' S.O.B., a plot point is her showing her breasts, and she does. And let me just say, Julie Andrews had an exquisite pair of breasts in that film, so kudos to her. Yes, but I think, who doesn't love Julie Andrews? Julie Andrews is a national treasure, is she not? I think she is. This letter comes from Christopher Morgan, who's talking about... Oh, you know what? This letter is actually a letter to Elizaviews, and I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it on Elizaviews. I'm going to save this letter because, indeed, it is the first letter, I think, to Elizaviews, and I'm going to save it and read it on Elizaviews because I think it's our first letter, and I would not want... I don't want to deprive her of reading her first letter. Let's see. No, I think that I've read all these letters now. I think all of them. I think so, or maybe not. I'll read this anyway. I might have read this yesterday. I'm not sure. Maybe I didn't. This one comes from James Rudge. James Rudge says, "Hi, Rob. First of all, I would like to thank you for providing such fantastic content during these uncertain times. Your love of Star Trek the Original Series has compelled me to rewatch my DVDs of the series. After all, I need to watch some quality Star Trek while Picard continues being such a monumental disappointment. Speaking of Picard, I hope you'll indulge me as I go on a little tangent about why Picard is awful in my eyes. I grew up watching Star Trek The Next Generation and the original series either on TV or on my dad's VHS tapes. It was watching these shows that made me love Star Trek and sci-fi in general. And when my parents got divorced, Star Trek was there to get my mind off a very miserable moment in my life, especially The Next Generation. Now imagine my surprise when I learned that Patrick Stewart was returning to the world of Star Trek once more as Captain Picard. It's been 18 years since Star Trek Nemesis came out, and while I enjoyed the movie, it was the antithesis of what Star Trek The Next Generation was all about. So I was excited for the new Picard series and was hoping that it would be so much better than Star Trek Discovery. And oh, how foolish and naive I was to think that Alec Kurtzman would respect the legacy of TNG. I have found Star Trek Picard to be worse than Star Trek Discovery, and so awful that I have turned to other sci-fi properties to scratch my itch for quality science fiction. Before rewatching the original series, I watched Babylon 5 for the first time, and I was blown away by how amazing the show was. I'm also reading Dune by Frank Herbert again, as I only read it once in high school and didn't appreciate it as I should have back then. So I'm excited for Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Dune, after he made Blade Runner 2049, which was a worthy sequel to Ridley Scott's 1982 masterpiece. Getting back to Picard, I hate it, because in order for us to tell us its nonsensical story that Rich Evans from Red Letter Media pointed out as a blatant ripoff of Mass Effect 3, it needs to tear down everything I know and love about TNG and even Voyager to a lesser extent. First of all, the levels of violence seen in Picard is appalling. Not because I hate violence or gore, because I do enjoy violent content, but that level of violence has no place in Star Trek. The writing team that worked on TNG learned that after they received a lot of complaints for the gory end of the parasites in the Season 1 finale Conspiracy. Sure, Conspiracy's end is tame by today's standards, but in 1987, that was as bad as seeing Icheb getting hacked up like a victim in a Saw movie, Hugh having his throat slit, or a Romulan senator justifiably angry at Picard's apparent abandonment of the Romulans getting decapitated by the last samurai. What's worse is that whereas the TNG writers toned down the violence or got around it with clever writing, the Picard writers seem to be one-upping each other to see who can make a more gory episode. This is Star Trek you're writing, not Mortal Kombat. But it's not just the violence that bothers me, it's the plot and the story as well. Why did we spend a third of the season on Earth? What was the point in saving Bruce Maddox when Girardi was going to kill him anyway? Girardi being welcomed back with open arms after admitting to having killed a man is so monumentally stupid that I think my brain's imploded into a singularity. What's the relation to the Borg, the Synths, and the Romulans? Who the hell knows, because apparently the writers don't. Synthetic space orchids? What? Okay, I admit the space jellyfish in Encounter at Farpoint was a what moment as well, but spaceborne fauna is more plausible in Star Trek than the synthetic equivalent of Biollante. That's a Godzilla reference. How the hell did the Tal Shiar of the Tal Shiar, I'm not going to attempt to spell Zat Vash or whatever they call themselves, infiltrate Starfleet? Are the Romulans refugees or not? And why is the Federation xenophobic all of a sudden? These questions and so many more need answers, but in true Kurtzman fashion, we'll probably never get an answer for them. Once I finish episode 10 of Picard, I'm done with the future of this franchise. I can't keep watching something I love repeatedly getting bastardized into a bad parody of itself. Thanks for letting me rant and rave about Star Trek, Rob. Stay safe during these dark times, and live long and prosper. Well, I don't necessarily, I can't argue with you about that. As you know, because I've been talking about it a lot. So yeah, indeed. Mukbang Reviews says, thanks for clarifying. I confused some great solo books with Straub collaborations with King. Who is your greatest collaboration? Who is your greatest collab writer creator? That's a good one. You know, I have to tell you, when I was a kid, I was really into Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. And they were both great science fiction writers in their own right, but they wrote Footfall. I've got it somewhere here. Footfall and Lucifer's Hammer. And they wrote a book that was fairly incomprehensible, but I got all the way through it, called The Mote in God's Eye. And I read those in junior high and high school. Actually, that's not true. I read them in junior high because I've told the story. I was reading Lucifer's Hammer, which is about a comet hitting the Earth. And I was reading it in the 6th grade, and it was taken away from me because I was so obsessed with that book. I took it into music class, and I always thought music class was kind of dumb. And my music teacher, Mrs. Ridenauer, caught me reading the book in class and took it away and gave Lucifer's Hammer to my principal in elementary school, Boyd Matson. What a great name. That was like right out of a Stephen King book. Boyd Matson was the principal of my elementary school. And it was terrifying. I mean, his name was like an onomatopoeia. It was so terrifying if you ever had to go see Boyd Matson. I mean, that name just exuded horror and terror. But it's true. And I had Lucifer's Hammer taken away. But that was the first time. Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman, Good Omens. That was a great collab. I mean, I did like The Talisman. I love Peter Straub and Stephen King teaming up. I mean, it's funny. Peter Straub, you forget, but back in the late 70s and 80s with books like Shadowland and Ghost Story and Floating Dragon and Coco, I mean, he wrote some great stuff. And he was right up there. He was considered a giant of horror, and that's why he and King collaborated. But I don't know. I haven't read a Peter Straub book in ages. Although I used to read all of his books, and I just haven't read one in a long, long time. But King, I'm still reading King religiously. So although I have to say I didn't dig the Institute, unfortunately. I did not. So yeah. But anyway, I'm going to cut this one, an hour and a half show being like, oh my God, a short show. I'm going to do an hour and a half show today, ladies and gentlemen. As I wanted to remind all of you tomorrow night, hang on. If I'm going to go out, I'll go out big. I'll go out in the big camera. Yes, I'm going to bring this episode number 376 of Robservations. We are 13 episodes away from episode 400. Now, I'm going to flat out say, people have written into me, and they're like, Rob, are you going to do a 400-minute show for episode 400? I don't know if I could do. I don't know if I have that in me, to be honest. I don't know if I can do a 400-minute show. A 300-minute show, 5 hours, that was rough. But 400 minutes, that would be, I don't know if I could do that. We'll do something special for 400. I still owe everybody a view at the Hot Toys wall that's, to be honest, still under construction. But, and everybody, I want to remind everybody, tomorrow night's Whining About Movies, double indemnity. Double Indemnity. You should watch that. But we'll see. I want to thank everybody for watching the channel. I want to thank you all for all the support, all kinds of support, writing me letters so I have something to talk about, sending in generous super chats and tips. Amazing. But just participating, making this one of the greatest channels on YouTube. I think it's great. I like the idea. Maybe I'll look into doing more interviews if I can with people. I think that would be fun. I think if I get one up, like if I get my Diane Duane interview up, I can point to people and go, here's this. And I'm going to still drop a little video. I've got my video I made of our journey to get toilet paper to the city of Bell, to another Imagination Connoisseurs local place of business. I'll get that up. And I want to thank my moderating staff, of course, Mike Bodden. I want to thank Detective Jim Boyers. I want to thank Lewis Yu and Jordy Lyons. And of course, Greg Smith. Greg Smith, who has his own wood-fired oven. He is the Riker of our moderators. I want to thank him for being there, and I'm going to bring this chat to an end. I want to thank you all for being here for Robservations episode number 376. Amazing. I will be on the John Campea show tomorrow. I will be back with Robservations probably tomorrow at 1, and we will be doing Whining About Movies tomorrow night. So I hope to see you there. Please go to the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page or the Whining About Movies Facebook page and interact with all the lovely folks there. And with that, everyone, I want to remind everybody, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And I know everybody is socially distanced, which is a smart thing, and we're all probably going a little stir crazy, but that social distancing is important, and I want everybody to stay clean, stay healthy, wash your hands, and let's continue to be imagination connoisseurs now and forever. So with that, I bring Robservations episode number 276 to an end, and I would like to say, as always, have a better day. I mean it.